Sometimes, you know, it pays to experiment at chess. And I'm not talking about just turning up at the board, ready to blast out a series of random moves. I'm talking about the willingness to play all types of positions, carefully thought through at home. Which conveniently brings us to the little known, little used Portuguese Opening. Now let's face it, 2 bishop b5 looks like a chump's move. I mean, what could be more natural for black than just to play c7, c6 and refute the whole thing? Well, join with me now and see if this is really the case. I think you're in for a few surprises. Let's go back now to the introductory position, where white plays 2 bishop b5. And I'll begin by listing what I see to be the advantages of this early bishop move. Well, the first obvious advantage, to my eye at least, is that this will come as a complete surprise to your opponents. And that really can't be underestimated in a game of chess. The ability to surprise the opponent is very important indeed. Secondly, I mean, you can immediately see that this bishop move is very provocative. It looks like, in fact, an idiotic move, because it gives black a free tempo. As we go through this video, we'll see that's perhaps not as important as it looks. The third advantage of the Portuguese Opening is that it keeps options open for white. For instance, it keeps an important option of f2, f4 available. And we'll see in many of the lines that white gets a clear advantage by playing this move. There are also options for white about where he wants to put his d-pawn. In some lines, the pawn is useful on d3, bolstering up e4. In some lines, white wants to blast open the game with d4, so white has these 2 pawn options available as well. Finally, if we just give black the move c6 and white bishop a4, the move that black wants to get in open games is d5, because it's that move really that frees the black position up. I would say it doesn't really rule the move d5 out totally, and I'm going to show you a couple of games quite soon where black gets into trouble playing this move. No, it doesn't rule it out, but it does dissuade black from playing d5. And in an open game, I think this is an important trump.
Since being introduced in the 16th century by that famous Spanish priest and Grand Master, the Ruy Lopez has stood the test of time. You only have to look at the long list of distinguished Grand Masters who've utilised this opening with great effect. Bobby Fischer, Anatoly Karpov, Garry Kasparov, all world champions, all use the Ruy Lopez. Play the Ruy Lopez and you're playing real chess. I'm going to start with the line a6, bishop a4 and knight f6. The main line basically, and the move I'm going to recommend is d2 to d3, which has the big advantage of avoiding the feared weapon, the Marshall counter gambit, as well as Karpov's favourite defence, the Zaitsev variation. It's a great way to play pure Lopez positions without having to learn reams of theory. Next on the list are the very early d6 variations, the so-called Steinitz. This is quite a flexible way for black to play. He sometimes plays bishop d7, sometimes plays bishop g4. He often even goes g6 and bishop g7 and knight e7. However, don't worry about the Steinitz. There's a price to pay for all of black's slow manoeuvring. White can quickly power through in the centre with d2 to d4, giving black lots of problems, as we'll see later. After that, it's tactics all the way, as we face the Schliemann head on. I'll be proving with knight c3 that it's white who does all the attacking. Finally, we'll be looking at some of black's third move alternatives, such as bishop c5 and the strange knight d4. Well, I have a few suggestions that should give you the advantage against these lines. This position has been witnessed literally thousands of times, both at club level and at Grandmaster level. Before delving into the theory of it, I really want to look at a few ideas to give you a taste of how to play this position as white. Here's a typical middle game position arising from the Ruy Lopez. White's position has a very solid feel to it, and there's also many chances to play aggressively. One of the main plans is to reroute this knight on b1. Knight comes to d2, and then to f1. From here, it has fantastic possibilities on the king side. For instance, it can come to g3, and later to f5. Also possible is that the knight can come to e3, where it patrols the squares d5, f5 and g4. From this sort of position, white can build up a really promising attack. For example, say h3, knight from f3 to h2, queen f3, knight g4, the other knight can come to f5. If black captures on g4, white can recapture with the h-pawn, and this gives white the added option of playing down the h-file. For instance, g3, king g2 and rook h1.
Defending against the Ruy Lopez or Spanish Opening can be a miserable task, so much so that it has been dubbed the Spanish torture. Black's best chance lies in counterattack, yet traditional methods such as the Marshall and Schliemann defences have been drowned in an ocean of analysis. Amongst Black's lesser known options, the Moller defence with bishop c5 has been under a cloud for a number of years, despite once having been advocated by that brilliant world champion Alexander Alekhine. But recent discoveries have given the Moller a new lease of life, and it now forms part of the opening repertoire of the young lions of world chess. After White's first move e4, most of the great players in history have at some time in their careers played the simple reply e5. Now the best by test for White is to develop his knight out to f3, attacking the pawn on e5, and then Black plays knight c6. Now in this position there is, in my opinion, only one real opening for White, and that is the Ruy Lopez or Spanish game, and that's distinguished by the bishop coming out to b5, from where it pressurises this knight on c6, which protects the pawn on e5. Now Black usually replies a6. After bishop a4, he brings his king's knight out, knight f6, and White castles. And after these moves, we meet a major parting of the ways in which Black can choose between several different options. Now the most popular of these moves is to play bishop out to e7 in preparation for castling, and this is known as the closed variation. Black can also lop off this white pawn on e4 with knight takes e4, and this is known as the open variation. But the move that I'm going to look at on this video is a rarely played option which has recently become all the rage among some of the world's youngest grandmasters, and that is the old move bishop c5. And this is known as the Moller defence. Now sometimes Black precedes bishop c5 by going first b5 and after bishop b3, only then bringing his bishop out. But in my view this is a less precise way of playing it for Black, because now White can start harassing the advanced Black b-pawn by going a4, threatening in fact to take this pawn on b5. And one game of the Kasparov-Anand match in New York continued from this position with bishop out to b7, d3, d6, and now Kasparov, playing white, renewed the threat against the b-pawn by going knight out to c3. Anand, with his b-pawn under attack, decided to push it on to b4, and Kasparov's knight came jumping into the d5 square. Now the problem for black in this position is that his queenside pawns, and especially the pawn on b4, have become rather dislocated, and Anand had some trouble in this game. And in fact black has played a number of games from this position in which he's always had some slight problems. So for this reason I'm not going to recommend this move order. So let's go back to the position in which black plays bishop c5 on his fifth move without the preliminary b5. In this position white has two main alternatives which I'm going to look at in turn on the video. He can play a fork trick with knight takes e5, and after black recaptures knight takes e5, white plays the move d4, which forks the bishop on c5 and the knight on e5. So white will recover his piece in that position.
Clarity and simplicity. Those were the hallmarks of Bobby Fischer at his best. The great American had a pure style, gunning down his opponents with remorseless precision, combined with a ferocious will to win. Of course, an opening such as the exchange Ruy Lopez gave Fischer's marvellous technique ample opportunity to shine. His career with the opening spanned 26 years, beginning with a demolition job on Super Grandmaster Lajos Portish at the Havana Olympiad in 1966, ending with 2 games against old rival Boris Spassky in the rematch 1992. We will see all those games here and much, much more. I can think of no better way to understand an opening than to study the games of its greatest exponent. And it is in this spirit that I commend Fischer's weapon, the exchange Ruy Lopez, to you. Let's kick off the video now with some sort of strategic explanation. What are the ideas that underpin the exchange variation of the Ruy Lopez? Well, I want to now consider a basic sequence of moves. White plays 1e4, black plays e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, and now a6. The most basic position of the Ruy Lopez that can possibly be. And here we'll be considering Fischer's weapon, bishop takes c6. And we'll let black recapture with the d-pawn. We'll see what happens later on when black recaptures with the b-pawn. That isn't very good. In 99% of games, black will capture back with the d-pawn. Okay, now I'm just going to give white the move d4. That's not the move which Fischer played, but anyway, it does, for our purpose, illustrate a theme. And here we have a fairly typical position for the variation. Basically, in this position, white has a winning pawn structure. As you can see, he's got 4 pawns to 3 on the king side. On the queen side, black has 4 pawns to 3, but black's 4 pawns can be held up by white's 3 pawns. That is the main strategic idea underpinning the whole variation. Therefore, if white could sweep all the pieces from the board and miraculously leave only the king and pawns left, he would actually have a winning king and pawn ending. So it follows white should be looking to exchange pieces in this opening. Each exchange brings him closer to victory. But of course, as Tarrasch remarks, before the endgame, the gods have placed the middle game. And that sort of comment explains a situation precisely like this, because of course, there's a trade-off going on here. In return for a poor pawn structure, black has 2 strong bishops and plenty of open lines and activity for his pieces. It follows that black should try and stay in the middle games and avoid the exchange of pieces. And here we have the basic fight of this opening. Hello everyone, I'm International Master Andrew Martin and welcome to this DVD where I'm going to be taking you through a secret weapon in the Ruy Lopez, a weapon with which my students have had considerable success. Now it seems scarcely possible in 2016 with all the databases, the playing programs, where everything is known, that there should be a byway in the Ruy Lopez, which let's face it is one of the most popular openings of all, and one which can give black considerable problems. But I'm going to argue that in the exchange variation, where white plays bishop takes c6, black plays d takes c6 in reply, white can surprise his opponent by playing the unusual knight c3. Now this is a very old-fashioned move. It was used by Lasker, Bogulyubov, Capablanca, Alekhine in the old days, but it's not used much these days. White would normally castle here or play some move like d4. But knight c3 is a dangerous move, and at club level I think if you've got a good knowledge of it, it could prove a massive points scorer for you. Just backing up one move, I'll also be taking you through what white should do if black plays b takes c6. That's hardly seen at all at a high level, but at club level it might be played by people who just want to get out of the book to avoid your ideas. So there we are, that's our idea for this DVD. Let's get on. In order to understand the Ruy Lopez exchange variation properly, we have to take all the pieces off the board and come down to the king and pawn ending position, which white has set up by taking on c6 early. It was proven back in 1940 by Max Erber that this type of position is actually winning for white. So let's see how it's done. Now the first thing to notice is that we've got a pawn majority on the king side for white, 4 pawns to 3. On the queen side, black certainly has 4 pawns to 3, but he's got a pair of double pawns, and that really limits what he can do. So the thing is, if you take all the pieces off the board right at the start in the Ruy Lopez exchange variation, white should win. So this helps us to navigate through all the middle games that arise in this variation. So let's see this Erber study and see how white does it. Obviously there are many different ways to the goal, but the technique is still the same. Firstly, you move your king up, and then you start to activate your majority on the king side. The idea is you're going to create a passed pawn on the king side. The black king has to stick around to look after the passed pawn, and then the white king makes for the queen side and gobbles up all of black's pawns. So Erber thought that c5 was the best move. It certainly accelerates events. Black's making an attempt to get a passed pawn himself. White stops this dead in its tracks. And as long as white's careful on the queen side with a move like b3, then he can hold black's pawns up. Here we see the problem with black's double pawns. Black's going nowhere with those pawns. Of course, what white mustn't do is to take on b5, because that undoubles black's pawns, and now black can create a passed pawn over there as well. So this would actually ensure that this endgame is a draw. But we don't want to draw, we want to win. So let's block the position on the queen side. Black makes a move, we block the position further, and now white continues to get to work creating a passed pawn. Now there are many different ways to do this. I'm just showing you one of the most straightforward. So black tries to break the white pawns up, and now Erber thought that perhaps the best way to illustrate what white is doing here is to even allow black to win a pawn. And white plays the very good move here, e5. If black takes on e5 with his pawn, white will take back on g5, and now white is going to create an outside passed pawn. The black king has to stay there to look after the pawn, and white's king is just going to invade, which we're going to see in the main game anyway. But let black win a pawn. Black takes on f4 check, white recaptures, black takes on e5, king e4. And it seems scarcely possible that white's going to win this because black's a pawn up. But the problem is clear, the black king is tied down. Up come the white pawns. What is black going to do? If he does nothing here, white will just push his pawns. Black makes an attempt to stop the pawns. White pushes on, sacrificing another pawn temporarily. Black chops it off. What else can he do? And now king takes e5 shows you the winning method. Black's king tries valiantly to come across. In comes the white king, and white's just going to gobble all of black's pawns and wins. Obviously, there are various ways you can do this, but that roughly is the winning.
Hello, my name is Roman Gingiashvili, and today's topic is very unusual. It's still about openings, but the topic is unusual. We are not going to be discussing the best lines, how to get advantage on this or that opening, but we will talk at first about the strategy and purpose of the opening and how useful is certain opening. Well, I mentioned in past several times that in the opening is not as important to have little advantage as to know the position you're going to play and to be very, very comfortable in a position, even if you don't have an advantage. The advantage you're going to have, especially when it's not on the highest level of chess, the advantage you're going to have knowing position better than your opponent. And if you don't play very top GM, then likely your opponent is not going to be able to play this opening on the level you will, because you will know it better. And this very, very frequently, I can't even tell you how many times I got nearly winning positions playing the openings that not like Ruy Lopez and a regular classical variation of Sicilian. I play the openings that I know the best. For example, Scotch Gambit, Two Knights Defense. But I know them so well, and I have so much analyzed there, and I know positions or how to play them. And, well, okay, I am playing on a higher level, but even my students, when they play on much lower level and they play opponents better than they are, they get very frequently winning position. Quite often they just win in the opening, not just getting winning position, but just win, just end the game right in the opening. So it's very, very important to know very well positions you're going to play. Now, what we're going to do today, we're going to be discussing kind of various possibilities and kind of departing from the main theoretical line and playing rather unusual systems. Not very unusual. Well, unusual systems, a lot of people like to play, but the reason they are doing is very, very wrong. Reasoning and the way people are doing. And this is very important, and you have to know it. Very frequently, people try to play unusual, very sharp lines that are simply bad, and relying on your opponent doesn't know the lines and you can trap him. Or play some highly anti-positional strategy. This is very bad, and I'm strongly against it. What I suggest, and I want to try, what I'm trying to recommend is to play variations and systems that by no means they will violate basic principles of chess. We're going to be doing the same development. Development is going to be the topic of main driving source of our opening, but we're going to develop little differently, and at all points you're going to have at least equal position, but you will know it so well that it's going to be a lot more beneficial than the best moves in a modern